So tell me about the hairiest real estate deal that you put together.
Well, the scariest one I ever put together was involving the Ottawa Senators Hockey Club. It's a National Hockey League franchise. I'm wearing a Sens hat here. And back in the day, this was in December 1990, we were in Palm Beach at the NHL's winter meetings, and there were 8 or 9 cities vying for 2 franchises. And the 2 franchises that were awarded that day, one was to Tampa Bay for what is now the Tampa Bay Lightning, and the other was to Ottawa for the Ottawa Senators, and it was pretty exciting. And Phil Esposito, who's a Hall of Fame hockey player, was representing um, Tampa Bay, and I was representing Ottawa. And a few weeks after these 2 franchises were awarded, Phil calls me up and said he was so excited. He said the first call I received when I got back to Tampa was from the governor of the state of Florida. And he said, "Congratulations, Mr. Esposito. We're so excited to have NHL hockey in Florida. What can I do to help?" And he said, "How was your reaction when you got back to Ontario?" I said, "Well, Phil, we didn't get a congratulatory call. We had a lawsuit from our government."
Well, there you go. So what you're saying is that it's not as real estate development friendly in Canada. Is that what I'm hearing?
Well, I think that would be, putting it in the most polite terms imaginable. And Michael, I know you're a straight shooter. You could have been a little bit harsher, I think. A project that it took us about, I think it was about 5.5 years to get the building through the approval process here in Ottawa. It was originally called the Palladium, and now it's called Canadian Tire Center. But back then it was the Palladium. And it took us about 28 months to build it. So it took us about twice as long to go through the planning process as to build it. And part of the reason why it was so hair-raising was that the government of the day opposed the building. And, governments have a lot of money and they have a lot of lawyers. And so we had to deal with all of that. But fortunately for hockey fans in this part of Canada, we were successful in defeating our own government. But there's no question that in the States, real estate development it tends to be a little bit easier, not everywhere, but in many cities, and certainly in Florida.
Gotcha. And tell us about a story or two about how how you've come up on other developments with big odds and now you've figured out a way around it, or you
Yeah,
what I'm trying to help people that are new developers or
yeah.
junior developer mid-size to understand that real estate development is a blood sport, and you need to have moxie and push through when they throw up these roadblocks towards you.
Yeah, well, something I haven't told you about yourself, Michael, is you are a magician. I look at you, yeah, and I think of you, Michael, as somebody who continuously pulling rabbits out of your hat, like a magician back in the day, right? And that's what entrepreneurs do in every field of endeavor. You back an entrepreneur like yourself into a corner, and once or twice you've been in that corner, or so have I. And people say, "There's no way that Michael's ever going to get out of this." It's like lowering Batman into a pond full of alligators or crocodiles, and they say, tune in next week to see what happens. And if you're a kid watching that stuff, you think, "Oh my gosh, this time Batman is finished."
Yeah.
But you tune in next week, and somehow or other he has managed to swing free like Tarzan or something like that. So you remind me of Batman and the crocodiles, or you remind me of a magician constantly pulling magic from a hat, and that's my nickname for you. So I just disclosed that to you for the first time here.
Well,
Um,
thank you. I appreciate those kind words. And it's not really magic, it's just persistence. You have to be very persistent,
yeah,
and there's always another way. It reminds me of
right,
the first Star Trek, right? The first
right.
Star Trek, they tested all captains with three possible scenarios, and all three scenarios were lose scenarios,
Yeah.
right? And then
Yeah.
Captain Kirk, William Shatner, he was so relaxed during the test, and everybody's wondering what the heck's going
Right.
on. And the scenarios come up, and he got out of it. And they're all going, "This is impossible. How, no one has ever passed this test." He said, "I didn't like the options, so I made my own option."
Exactly. Well, I think the thing that entrepreneurs deploy all the time is creativity. You talked about options, same thing. And when backed into a corner, entrepreneurs become extremely creative, and they're able to do things that frankly other organizations and institutions, governments, for example, they just can't do it. If you want something done, really done, you need to put an entrepreneur in charge, and he or she will get it done. Anyway, there's a couple of things I'll mention just to add to the discussion on the real estate side. Michael, you've known me for a long time now, and I'm a great believer in what I call animation, real estate animation. And it's very simple. It's not Disney animation, it's real estate animation, which is, adding new revenue streams to real estate. And one of the simplest things, this is not news, one of the simplest things to do is to add, for example, a basement apartment to new homes. It's not hard to do. And you have a nice two-story home, and then you have a basement. Certainly in Eastern Canada, you have to put a basement in because, it's minus 37 here, at least part of the year. And if it has its own ingress and egress, which is a very useful thing to have, you could put a 2 or 3 bedroom apartment into the basement. And that means you've created a multi-generational house where grandma and grandpa can live with you, or an adult child returning maybe with their own children. Or if you just need some extra money to pay your mortgage, you can rent it out. Well, I coach probably 11 or 12 of the biggest home builders in Ottawa, and I'm a good talker. I could convince pretty much anybody of anything. Maybe that's not a compliment to myself, but I can. And these are some of them are pretty big builders, and I tried for a decade, 10 years, to get one of these larger home builders to add basement suites to their new homes as an option. I said, you don't have to put it in, but you might because it'll create more affordable housing, more housing options. And, if you're a retired person, living on maybe $2,000 a month, an extra 1,000 or $2,000 a month from your basement apartment is very meaningful amounts of money, right? And you're also, as I said, creating an opportunity for somebody to live somewhat more affordably. Now, one of my home builder clients, they said, "Oh, we're making so much money. Why would we bother with that?" And finally, one of my clients said, "Well, we might give that a shot in a new subdivision that they were developing." And you know this business at least as well as I do. The typical gross profit margin for a home builder is about 13 to 15% on the house. That's it. And then if they sell you, nicer fixtures, better plumbing fixtures, better kitchens, better lighting, better flooring, they hope to make about a 40% margin on that. Well, this particular developer, excuse me, offered to add basement apartments, and they came up with this great name. They called it Income Series Housing, which I thought was a great name. I wish I could claim it was mine. It is not. Income Series Housing. And out of the first 45 homes that they sold in the subdivision, 30 people opted for that.
Wow.
And they were paying about 85,000 or $90,000 for, a two-bedroom apartment, which is not very difficult to put in. A little bit more drywall, a little bit more lighting, one bathroom, couple of bedrooms, micro kitchen, probably from IKEA, so not too expensive. And 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 uh, and their gross profit margin on that was 80%.
Yeah,
So
that's fantastic.
they went from 13 to 15% to 40% on the upgrades, and then on the suite. And then from the point of view of the buyer, okay, the home buyer, I don't have to tell you this. If you were to buy a house and then put in, an ingress and egress to the outside afterwards and add the two-bedroom apartment, probably cost you 135,000. So if they were paying 85 or 90,000, they felt like, and they were getting a really good deal on it, right?
Sure,
Um,
everybody wins. That's
it was
the best
everybody
ones.
wins, including I think you make a more interesting society, a more equitable society, and you're helping elderly people and also young people. One of my daughters, my middle daughter, she bought a three-bedroom house with two and a half bathrooms, single car garage, and it had a walkout condition, basement with a walkout. And I said to her, Miriam, you're putting in a one-bedroom apartment there. So she was able to live in her own three-bedroom, two and a half bath, single car garage home after renting out her basement apartment for $700 a month, including her mortgage, her property taxes, all her utilities. So she and her two children and her husband, it's hard to find a house for $700 a month,
That's
So
great.
these are not complicated things, but I think our industry is one of the most conservative industries in the world. And, Michael, you probably heard me say this before. I've used this before. This is an iPhone. I think it's an older one, iPhone 13. Um, and and if every day I got in my car with this iPhone, if the tech industry was as inefficient as the real estate industry, every day I got in my car with my iPhone, I'd have two or three semi-trailers following me with knobs and tubes in them to make the thing work. That's how really terrible the real estate industry is. It's very, very conservative and inefficient. And so there's a lot that we can do without necessarily, putting a man or woman on Mars.
Yeah, for sure. And what I find is that the larger the development company, the slower they are to change,
Yeah,
right? Whereas, and because our mission is to solve the housing crisis, anything that we do for every level of developer that can get the doors open, get people housed faster is in the right direction. So,
yeah. I
all
think though that we're in real trouble in Canada, at least in Ontario, we're in real trouble in terms of faster. Um, everybody talks about speeding up the process, but Michael, certainly in Ontario, we have a huge industry of consultants, planners, people who do environmental studies, people who do all kinds of, woodland studies, archaeology studies. We have this enormous industry that has a vested interest in making the process longer, more complicated, more expensive. I sold a property to a large developer here in Ottawa, and they spent $11.5 million on a piece of land. And it was within the urban boundary. So it wasn't, off in the sticks somewhere. It was already inside the urban boundary and services were not far away. It took them 8.5 years to get through the planning process. And that cost them a few $1 million. I don't know how many million, but millions of legal fees and studies and whatever application fees. So they spent $11.5 million, and then they probably spent 3 or 4 million more, maybe more than that, but millions more for 8.5 years. Then the pandemic hit, and they were delayed for a further year. So if you think about it, it's a 9.5 years. They buy the land, they spend a lot of money, and then finally, after 9.5 years, they register their plan, and they're able to, put up their first townhouse and make their first dollar. So I used to say, Michael, this is for your fans. I used to say there were three ways to get poor. Okay, number one, get divorced. Number two, buy a horse ranch. Number three, buy an NHL team. Now, out of those three, I only did one, but I've added a fourth one, become a land developer. And people laugh when I say that, but most people, if you bought a property for $11.5 million, and it took you 9.5 years before you made your first dollar of revenue, a lot of people would go broke doing that.
Yeah, and it is a danger in the industry. That's one of the reasons why, we filter out and we only buy one in every 50 or 100 properties that are
Wow.
shown to us. If it's
Wow.
not in the money on the day we buy it, why would we buy it? But getting back to what you said earlier, that's one of the reasons why the cost of housing is so high because of the
Yeah.
bureaucracy. Because that developer you just talked about is not just the time; it's the
Hmm.
fact that they're paying interest on
Oh my
that
gosh.
money for years and years. And they say that all apartments would be a third less in cost if they could get developed faster. It doesn't matter if it's Forbes magazine or any of the ones that study how much of the cost is bureaucracy, right?
Well,
Changing the
I do know that there was a study done in Vancouver where they said for Vancouver proper that you haven't bought the piece of land yet, you haven't built anything. Before you start anything on one of those 20, 30, 40 story towers, you've got to budget $450,000 per door for fees and studies. You know, that's incredible. And I don't know how many years we're talking about, but then you have to actually buy the land and you have to actually build the building and then you have to do the marketing and sales or rentals or whatever. It's very, very difficult. So, the fourth thing that I added to how to go broke, I think, is actually probably pretty realistic.
Yeah. Well, and it's one of the reasons why you always have to stay in the money for every step so that if you do get delayed,
Yeah.
right, you're not in trouble. And it's one of the other reasons why I stay out of a big market like Vancouver
Oh,
because
yeah.
of the delays and the even just the general cost of building can be
Mm.
double. And there's millions of people that live outside the city center. So you might as well do that. They need a
Yeah,
home.
I don't disagree. Something else that, I do some coaching in the States. Something else that I really like, which is going on, at least with some of the people I coach in the States, is when they're doing a subdivision, a big subdivision, 800 homes or 2,000 homes, whatever it might be, they are reserving part of it. Some of them are reserving part of the subdivision for starter homes. And one of the things I was hoping that the people I coach would do is, not just build and sell homes, because, let's say you had a subdivision, Michael, and you had 850 homes you were going to build, townhomes, single families, whatever. But okay, so you're going to sell them. So you build 850 homes, takes you a long time to do the land development, get the planning approvals, and then you build and sell them. But once you've sold all 850, you're like a baseball player. At the beginning of spring training, how many home runs have you hit? Zero. You're right back to zero, right? You've got to hit another 30 home runs this year to earn your salary. So one of the things I wanted some of my clients to do was to add small starter homes, but they would be rentals and they'd be much smaller. And so one of these folks did that where they could have built 9 mansions, $1.5 million, $2 million mansions. Instead, they were able to build 44 600, 700 square foot starter homes, and they were able to rent them out. And they were concerned that the rest of the subdivision, where you had, well-off families, would not like to have an enclave within the subdivision of modest homes. But it turned out to be quite different. First of all, the developer has 44 rentals that they can keep, and they have some continuing monthly recurring revenues, which is a good thing. But also, it turned out that what you had is in the bigger homes, you had, mom and dad and their kids, and then the parents, the grandparents were in the starter homes. And then when the grandparents moved on, these families had grown up, and the parents had become grandparents and the children had moved into the parent role, and it was a really interesting cycle within this subdivision. And so this particular developer in New Hampshire, now every single subdivision they do, they have some starter homes, and they'll do more. So maybe over a period of a decade they might end up with hundreds or even possibly thousands of starter homes that are rentals, making their communities a little bit more interesting and a little bit more, successful. The worst thing I think for people, and I'm getting older, the worst thing that I think for many people would be to go into a retirement residence. I mean, frankly, I went to visit one of my friends in a retirement residence, and he had a room that was so small. And he was paying, I don't remember how much, I think it was $7,000 a month, which to me seems like a lot. $7,000 a month for a room. And I was there with my friend, and he had a table that was just big enough for him and me to have a cup of coffee and with his granddaughter. But that's it. He didn't have a microwave. He didn't have a hot plate. I don't think he had a toaster. He had a little fridge so he could, have some milk and maybe some cereal. But he had a bed. And now the lobby was beautiful. It had marble everywhere, but the room itself, and the worst part of it for me was the fact that his windows would only open this much because under the Ontario Building Code, you can't have windows on, upper floors that open like this, just in case, a kid should, tumble out. So you couldn't really get much fresh air. There was no balcony. I mean, these places, at least in my opinion, are very expensive, and they don't really. I think you go there to die.
Yeah, living, you're saying the room was so small that you have to
Hmm.
go out in the hall to change your mind?
Oh, I love that. I haven't used that. I'm going to steal that one. Uh,
You can
but
have
uh,
it.
I,
You can
I
have
like
it.
it. But it was very depressing. Now, I didn't want to say anything because he's a good pal of mine. Um, but there he is.
Yeah. No, and I mean, building apartments that are set up, with some of ours are, we call them 55 plus. So they're set up so that people can live at home longer, and we even have a place where the we'll call them day nurses that come in for an hour or 2 hours or four
Exactly.
hours, have a room to deal with stuff. And it doesn't cost that much more, and you make your units with wider doors, extra handles. So just, we're
Sure.
last time I checked, we're all getting older every day.
I think that might be right.
Yeah.
All right. Is there anything else I can help with today?
Um, is there an incident where, you had to deal with, say, the city bureaucracy, and they were putting up a roadblock, and you said, "This is how we got around it." We want to give people the understanding and some of the ways that, look, we could never list all the scenarios of what can get blocked. Uh, but when you hit a roadblock, you don't just accept it. You say, okay, what's the way? If I can't get out the front door because they're blocking that, you go out the back door. If you can't get out the back door, you go upstairs and go out a
Yeah.
window, or you go in the basement and go out. You always have another thing, and I want people to get that idea that there's always a way.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I get the question. So I did have a problem. I built an office building. It was a couple 100,000 square feet, and it was a nice site, and it was quite successful back in the day. And then because we had some extra land, I said I'm going to build another tower here. And I took the plan into the city, and they said you don't have enough parking. The cities are crazy about parking. Although I have to give the city of Edmonton, credit. They said, look, if you
yeah,
want to build a building today and you don't want to provide any parking, don't. I mean, if you can't rent your apartments or you can't rent your office space, well, too bad. Because Edmonton is really has a people mover that actually works pretty well from what I can tell. So anyway, so the city said you don't have enough parking, And we had a tower that we were building, and we had parking, I think one or two levels below the tower. And I said, I think we do have enough parking, but they went through their calculations, and I went through our calculations. I have a master's degree in traffic and transportation engineering from the University of New South Wales in Sydney. So I thought I had actually done the numbers correctly. But anyway, they said, no, you're short, like quite a bit, like 150 parking spaces. So I thought about it for a while, and because they weren't going to give me the building permit, and I had just signed a lease with the Royal Bank of Canada. And when you sign a lease, they expect you to deliver, right? There's a time element here. You don't deliver, Royal Bank is rather a big animal to tackle, especially in the court. So anyway, so I kind of scratched my head. What the heck are we going to do? We got to get going here. And so I went back to them with a new plan. And the new plan was to expand the parking garage under the building all the way to to the property lines. And they said, "Oh, no, 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 you can't do that. Parking can only be underneath the building." And I said, "Show me
Why?
where in the zoning rules and regulations or the Ontario Building Code it says you can't do this." Well, yeah, 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 we'll have to get back to you on that. So a couple of weeks go by, and maybe I shouldn't admit this. We started building the damn thing, and we were out of time. And we actually, without a building permit, we actually built this thing. We topped the building before they actually showed up with a stop work order. And for anybody who's watching this video or reading about it in your book, Michael, uh, before you get a stop work order, you can be fined. It's a civil fine, right? And that's just money. If you continue to work after you get a stop work order, it becomes a criminal matter. And I didn't want to go to the Crowbar Motel, and I didn't want any of my people to go. So I said to everybody, okay, well, we got up 6 or 8 floors, whatever it was. We better stop. But finally, about a week later, they released my building permit because they found out, sure enough, you can have underground parking right to your property line within like a few centimeters. And so we got the building done on time, and the Royal Bank moved in, and other tenants as well. But it's like you said, don't take no for an answer. If the front door is blocked, go out the back.
Yep, exactly. And you spoke a bit about parking. There is an area in the States, and I'm sure there's hundreds in the States and dozens in Canada with the same scenario. But what was very good about this parking study, and I'm just going to summarize it,
Hmm.
is to have two almost identical small cities that were only 15, 20 minutes apart. And both of them had the same parking issues. If you had a restaurant, you needed to provide, 38 spaces and stuff like that. So one of them stuck with their old parking,
Hmm.
and one of them did what Edmonton did. Just eliminate it. You figure out your own
You do
parking
it.
if you want to do it. Well, guess what? The one that has no parking has a thriving restaurant community
Oh,
and
for sure.
thriving downtown. People always will find a place to park. In a perfect world, there's parking everywhere, but we are not in a perfect world. And the other town, right, still has a dead and dying downtown, but it's got
Yeah.
lots of parking,
Yeah.
right?
Well, yeah, we've paved our cities over with parking lots. I can tell you the one city in the United States that does not have an affordable housing problem is Houston. Houston has no zoning code. You
Yeah.
know, if I own a house here and Michael comes along and he'd like to build a 4-story, building next door, go to it. And they have lots of missing middle buildings there, and there's no shortage of housing in Houston. Houston's a great spot, but they have no zoning code. They have a building code, they have a fire code, they have a safety code, but they don't have a zoning code. They said now there are some under the safety code. There are some restrictions. For example, you can't build a fireworks factory next to your house, Michael,
Oh,
and you
good.
can't. No, that's a bad idea. You can't build a petrochemical plant next to your house either. You can't build an abattoir next to your house. Okay. So those are all things that that comes under the safety code. It's not zoning, it's safety. But if you wanted to build like I said, a 4-story, multi-res building, knock yourself out.
Yeah, no, and
There was
here's the thing.
I'll just add this, there was a very interesting University of Chicago study that said if the zoning codes in the United States in 2009 were as flexible as they had been in 1965, the American GDP, gross domestic product, would be 35% bigger.
Yeah,
That is an unimaginable number. It means that the zoners, we call them the zoners, and the NIMBYs, not in my
yeah,
backyard, um, those people have really hamstrung, I think, hamstrung, economic development and progress. And, if you think about 35 or so percent on an economy the size of the United States, it's just an unimaginable number. I think I worked it out back in 2009. It was something like 80,000 US dollars per family per year that was missing because our zoners had gone absolutely insane. For example, I lived in Canberra for a number of years while I was doing my PhD in urban economics. And in Canberra, you're not allowed to build a new subdivision without having a plaza where you could pick up, a liter of milk, popsicle.
right.
It's Australia. You got
Yeah,
to have a pub. So they everywhere you went, you had small mini malls, basically. Probably 10 or 12,000 square feet, so not really huge, but nice plazas. And then they would have small office buildings so you could get a dentist or an accountant, a doctor, whatever. And so they would have subdivisions that had housing and had jobs and had opportunity. And they were also very walkable, right? So they used a grid pattern. Well, here in Ottawa, we have communities, suburban communities, where we have 3,500 houses in a row without a single job, without a single opportunity like I said, to buy a liter of milk or a popsicle for your kids. So, we have rode backwards. You've got to have schools that nobody can reach. They're across huge arterial roads, and you've got to have industry and business parks and shopping. And, think about, the typical regional mall separated from everybody by major highways. You can't walk there. And if you did, you're taking your life in your hands. We design absolutely terrible cities today.
yeah. And to defend the bureaucrats for a moment, right?
Well, that's
Okay.
hopeless.
No, seriously, there's no question that there's way more, and moving the goalposts is the biggest part that they don't understand, that every time they ask for something else, it costs a fortune in dollars
Yeah,
and time. And where does all that cost go? It goes into the price of rent, right?
yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
but we do need some, like as much as I was an entrepreneur, I'd love to say no zoning, just go build whatever you want, wherever you want, build it, the building code, but still. But it does make sense to have some there, but they have to take away the power from the bureaucrats to be able to delay a project. There are mayors that are famous for going in and saying, no, you will approve everything in a day or 2 days. None of this 6 months and then changes and it's another 3 months, then it changes and there's another 3 months, right? If they could get that to just flip upside down the list of we need 100 things on every project, to actually go down and go, well, we'd like these 10, but we only really need these 10. Do these 10, right? And if they did that, the housing crisis in Canada would work itself out. Everything is supply and demand. The
Yeah,
price would come
100%.
down.
Well,
Yeah.
the other thing, of course, that contributes to what we're talking about is uh, many cities, and Ottawa, capital of Canada, is one of them. Uh, for the last probably 30 years now, the city of Ottawa has banned rural subdivisions. Okay? First, they introduced a moratorium and then they banned them. So, the planners here in Ottawa think that everybody wants to live in a tower downtown above a pub. Well, my wife and I have 5 kids. No, we don't want to live in a tower with 5 little kids and downtown where it's just not a thing. So our zoning codes have become so restrictive that it's hard for people to express themselves. Like a rural village is a completely different, sort of kettle of fish. I auctioned myself off at the Metcalf. Metcalf's a tiny village outside of Ottawa. I auctioned myself off at the Metcalf annual fair. Breakfast with the founder of the Ottawa Senators. And so they put me up on stage. I'm not exactly Brad Pitt, so the women didn't bid, but lots of the guys did. They want to talk hockey, they want to talk business, they want to talk real estate. But I said to the organizer, let me make a little speech before you auction me off. So I stood up on the platform. It was like a 35 or 40-second speech. And I said, I want to thank the Metcalf Fair for letting me contribute to the village here. But I have to tell all of you, there were, 500 farmers in the room and villagers. And I said, I have to say thank you, all of you and the village of Metcalf for giving me the greatest gift of my life. And there was complete silence in the room. What? What kind of gift could we have given, Prof. Bruce? And then I said, my wife. And I said, my wife, Dawn, was born in Metcalf, and her first 8 years, she was brought up in that little village. And she, with all her girlfriends, they got the run of the place. It was very safe. They didn't have helicopter parents back then. Even little girls could run around and enjoy the outdoors and whatever the village had to offer. And she went to a three-room schoolhouse, and they taught her good values. It is a wonderful environment, but according to the planners in Ottawa, well, we can't have any more of that. What the heck is that all about? I just don't get it.
No, a blend of everything is what works for society so that
Yeah.
you can find your spot when there's a little bit of everything. And as you said earlier, having all the industrial in one area and all of this in another area, it makes it that everybody would need a car. Whereas,
Well, I give you another example of that. Well, everybody does need a car. If you don't have a car, you're disenfranchised. Um, but another example is you go down any rural road in Saskatchewan or Alberta or North Dakota, Minnesota, really anywhere, and you'll see as you go down the road, you'll see mom and pop have a house. And you look in behind, they have, a workshop. And some of those workshops could be 30,000 square feet. And they make kitchen cabinets there, or they do automotive repair, or whatever it might be. I mean, it's very, very typical. We've been doing this in North America probably for 200 years, right? Where mom and pop have some kind of, shop back in the day, blacksmith shop or whatever. And here again in Eastern Ontario, Michael, we have probably within 100 kilometers of where I'm standing, we probably have at least 35 business parks or industrial parks where we haven't had a single new building in 30 years.
wow.
They're just completely stalled out. And so people call me up and then they hire me for some reason as a consultant or coach, and they say, "Well, what do we do?" And I said, "Well, the solution is really, really simple. You should change the zoning on your business parks to allow accessory residential, right? So somebody could come along and buy a 2 acre industrial lot, put a house on it with, a workshop or a manufacturing facility, light industrial. We're not talking petrochemicals or anything like that. So light
Right.
industrial. And they all say, "Oh, no, 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 we can't do that. That would be mixing, industry and residents. We can't do that." And then I say to them, "Well, drive down any rural road in Ontario, and there are probably tens of, if not hundreds of thousands of these across Ontario. Ontario is a pretty big place, geographically anyway. And I said, it's very likely you're going to see hundreds of these within, a few tens of
Yeah,
kilometers.
yeah, for sure. For sure.
All right. Well, is that helpful?
Very helpful. Very helpful.
All right. Well,
And
I'm gonna sign off now. If anybody wants to reach out to me, I'm always available by email, Bruce at brucemfirestone.com. So Bruce at brucemfirestone.com. You got to stick the M in the middle, right, Michael?
there you go. All right. Thank you, boss. Appreciate it. And I'm at Michael at affordableapartments.ca. So
Beautiful.
not .com. Everybody says tries a .com. .ca for Canada.
Attaboy.
Michael at affordable apartments with an S. One word. Thanks.